Dear participants, guests, and online viewers, welcome to Armenian Shakespeare Association's 6th conference. This year marks our 10th anniversary. As they say, the first 10 years are the hardest, and from here we look confidently into the future for widening and deepening our collaboration with Shakespeare scholars and theatre practitioners worldwide. We are delighted to welcome such diverse group of scholars and variety of thought-provoking contributions. Thanks for joining us in this celebratory year. We thank also American University of Armenia, Dr. Micah Hilson and Garine Abelian for hosting us so warmly, and our partner Yerevan State Chamber Theatre. This year we also mark several important dates. 150th anniversary of Shakespeare at the Armenian Theatre with the production of Merchant of Venice on 17th April 1866. Also on 1st of May, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of scholar, writer, and bibliographer, the very good friend of ASA, Mr. Bakhtiar Hovakimyan. He authored 28 books on Armenian theatre, prominent actors, directors, and writers. Bakhtiar Hovakimyan's 500-page volume entitled Shakespeare in Armenian Theatre is the complete ultimate Shakespearean bibliography indispensable for Shakespearean scholarship in Armenia. I have divided my talk dedicated to historical context of Macbeth on the Armenian stage of page into 3 sections. 19th century initial translations and adaptations across diasporas, 20th century from genocide to dictatorship, and 21st century new era and old challenges. From early 19th century, amid revolutionary changes sweeping France and the growing number of independence movements among East European nations, the revival of the national identity and culture was inevitable among Armenians too, living under foreign rule for over 6 centuries. Since the adoption of Christianity in 301, Armenian church schools educated youngsters across provinces, even under foreign occupation. In the 19th century, alongside traditional church schools that shaped future scholars, historians, poets, and artists, the growing number of free secular schools were spreading across historical Armenian territories and Armenian communities elsewhere. The initial theatre performances were regularly produced by scholastic theatres during the festivities of Christian calendar, aiming to improve their pupils' oratory and rhetoric skills. Scholastic theatres gave performances attended by a wider community fascinated by live theatre, not only Armenians but other nationalities. Among newly emerged schools were renowned Nersisian School, opened in Tiflis in 1824, Armenian Philanthropic College in Calcutta that opened in 1820, dozens of free schools for boys and girls in Constantinople, Smyrna, Lvov, Paris, Venice, and elsewhere, opening through 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Initial translations of Shakespeare into classical Armenian, not surprisingly, happened in Calcutta, or published in Shtemaram periodical in 1822. Thus, the first recorded performance of Macbeth took place at the Mkhitarist school in Venice. The Mkhitarist congregation, established in Venice in 1717, was named after Mkhitar Sebastatsi, a Catholic monk escaping Ottoman persecutions of Christian subordinates. The French play entitled Macbeth by Jean-François Ducy was adapted into classical Armenian Grapar by a young priest, Father Samuel Keserian, which had little in common with Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy. The cast comprised of 8 male actors. The character of Lady Macbeth, replaced by Macbeth's youngest son, called Edgar, and played by teenage male actors and young monks. The 1864 performance of Macbeth coincided with the tercentenary of William Shakespeare's birth, as Father Samuel was reportedly Shakespeare's ardent admirer, in contrast with Mkhitarist scholars, who traditionally were followers of neoclassicist thinking, from Diderot to Voltaire, from Molière to Racine. So great was the fascination of Father Samuel with Shakespeare that Mkhitarists published a decade later the entire tragedy of Macbeth, with no cuts, into classical Armenian in their periodical Bazmavep in 1877 and 1878. 3 years later, in Constantinople, Հակոբ Վարդովյան's troupe, called the Asian Theatre, Asiakan Theatron, staged the full version of Shakespeare's Macbeth in 5 acts at the theatre belonging to Naum Brothers. Directed by Vartovyan, who appeared in the title role, the cast included the future stars of the Armenian stage, Yeranuhi Garagashian as Lady Macbeth, and future Shakespeare actor, very young Petros Adamyan as Macduff. The translation belonged to Khachatur Uğurekyan, who this translation unfortunately failed to survive the test of times. The constitution for Armenians proclaimed by the Ottoman regime, giving them certain rights and freedoms, was not destined to last long. Only a decade later, following the coronation of Sultan Abdul Hamid in 1876, Armenian theatres were banned. Macbeth, among other Shakespearean tragedies, were banned for decades to come. The murders for power within Scottish royal house were reminders of the bloody killings in Sultan's own household, as Abdul Hamid II came to power following mysterious and sudden deaths of his sibling. Armenian professional actors could either join the emerging Turkish language theatre, founded also by Armenian actor-director Hակոբ Vartovyan himself, or, refusing to be part of the Turkish theatre, searched for opportunities to serve the national theatre outside the Ottoman territory. In the late 19th century, the tragedy of Macbeth continued to fascinate Armenian editors and authors. Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy had over 10 translations into modern Armenian, Western and Eastern Armenian by the turn of the century. Though the first significant version of Macbeth into Eastern Armenian was published by linguist Stepanos Malchasyants in 1892, using English version, also the German translation by Schlegel, as well as the Russian version by Ustrelov. Malchasyants wrote that he also studied the first French version by François Hugo. Nonetheless, his translation followed the rules of the Armenian classical verse, comprising between 12 and 16 syllables. In essence, only legendary Shakespearean actor Vahram Papazyan turned to the role of Macbeth for several decades, starting from 1914. The 1914 production of Macbeth was directed by experienced directors Armenian and Ovi Sevumyan in Tiflis, and Siranush appearing in the role of Lady Macbeth. Papazyan, after the production, this first attempt in the role of Macbeth, returned to Constantinople in the same year. With the support of Martiros Menakyan, he anticipated to revive the Armenian National Theatre in Constantinople, saving it from French vaudevilles and operettes that he disliked profoundly. The Armenian troupe in Constantinople was regularly performing at the Theatre Le Petit Champ in the district of Bere of Constantinople, though the Armenian genocide perpetrated by Young Turks was only months away. At the end of the 19th century, Hovannes Masehyan had started his translations of Shakespeare, intending to translate all 35 plays. Born in Persia to an Armenian family, Masehyan received the best available education and was fluent in 8 languages. Later, he was appointed by the Shah ambassador of Iran to Berlin during World War I, to London in the 1920s, to Paris, and finally to Tokyo in 1931. Fluent in classical and European languages, he translated Shakespeare and other authors into Eastern Armenian. Masehyan's translation of Macbeth was published in 1923 and was published by Mkhitarists in Vienna this time. This edition was donated to Shakespeare Birthplace Trust by Sir Sidney Lee, Masehyan's friend during his diplomatic assignment in London. In August 1914, before the start of the genocide, Papazian managed to escape from Constantinople and finding refuge in Odessa with local Ukrainian and Jewish hosts. In 1924, he performed Macbeth with local actors from Kharkiv, and in 1926 with the troupe of the Armenian State Theatre performing in Rustaveli Theatre in Tiflis. Papazian translated Macbeth again the following year in the Civic Theatre in Gyumri, the second city of Armenia, with solid theatrical heritage that he loved particularly. At the height of his stage career, Papazian continued performing Macbeth in Southern Caucasus and through USSR, included with the Armenian State Theatre of Baku, directed by Levon Kalantar on 18 January 1928. The 1933 production in Yerevan, capital of Armenia, was directed by Armen Gulakyan, was one of the substantial adaptations of Shakespeare's tragedy at the First Theatre, now renamed Sundukyan, with original music composed by no other than Aram Khachatryan. The production was criticized for its unexpected directorial decisions, some of which were in line with the socialist propaganda. For instance, 3 witches were represented as 3 priests dressed in black overcoats. Certainly such interpretation was viewed positively by the anti-religious atheist Soviet authorities. Gulakyan dared to introduce some textual changes, investing quotes from other plays. According to theatre historian Babken Harutyunyan, by bringing Jack Cade's rebellion against Henry VIII to the center stage, the director had diminished the significance of Shakespeare's tragedy and overshadowed Macbeth's character. It seemed that the insertion of English rebellion against the king would please the Soviet regime, drawing parallels with 1917 October Revolution in an atmosphere of growing censorship of the 1930s. Gulakyan edited the tragedy to bring, quote, ideological corrections to the plot and action that suited the socialist propaganda, end of quote. Shakespeare has been unquestionably the most popular writer since the formation of Soviet Republic of Armenia in 1920, where dozens of new translations emerged. Even during the years of Stalin's Great Terror, Shakespeare remained on bookshelves and theater repertories in Armenia. Few years ago, while working at Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust, I came across a letter inside the 1933 Armenian edition of Macbeth. It was sent by the Soviet embassy in London with 4 volumes of Armenian translations from for Birthplace Library in 1936. Those volumes were edited by famous national poet Yerevan State. Soon after these donations, Yerevan State was imprisoned in 1936, being accused of counter-revolutionary and nationalist activity. Later, in 1937, the Armenian national poet was brutally murdered in jail by Stalin's officials. His body was never recovered, as his books, including his editions of Shakespeare's plays, were banned from circulation. The celebration of 400th anniversary of Shakespeare in 1964, organized by Shakespeare Center at the Academy of Sciences of Armenia, led by academician Ruben Zaryan, Shakespeare productions, concerts, operatic and musical performances, academic conferences in Armenia lasted almost 2 years into 1966. Hence, during these celebrations, Papazian performed for the last time a scene between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth with Lucia Hovanesyan at Aram Khachaturian Concert Hall in May 1964. Papazian at that stage was 76-year-old. Following the collapse of the Soviet state, Armenia gained independence, yet the country plunged into the First War over Nagorno-Karabakh, and following the war, as the rest of former republics, it fell into a period of economic and political stagnation. The new millennium promised to bring some stability and economic cultural revival. It was in this environment of relative peace and development that Armen Khandikyan's production of Macbeth was staged at the Yerevan State Dramatic Theatre, with aesthetic directorial solutions and strikingly modern set. The central characters, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, were presented as loving couple, surrounded by 3 spirits dressed in white. What a contrast from 1933 production in Stalinist era. The couple's relationship was dominated by a magnetic, convincing Lady Macbeth, interpreted by Louisa Gambarian. Macbeth, acted by the famous actor Artur Utmazian, soft-spoken and hesitant, seemed battling with his guilty conscience, gradually transforming into the killing machine in the second half. This award-winning, memorable production traveled to Shakespeare festivals, including to Gdansk Shakespeare Festival and beyond. Finally, in 1926, a joint British-Armenian collaborations of a new 90-minute adaptation of Macbeth is currently being directed by Elliot Huxtable from UK with Yerevan State Chamber Theatre. Already with 2 highly commended and successful Shakespearean productions in recent years, Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, Chamber Theatre's 3rd Shakespearean production promises to combine the British savoir-faire of Shakespearean drama with fresh and genuine interpretative approach by this dynamic and young ensemble of 8 performers who have no intention to emulate any celebrated actor of the past or present. Today, the political landscape of Armenia appears uncertain once again, with parliamentary elections in June, with political parties divided between pro-Western and pro-Russian camps. Political ambitions, treachery for power, official cynicism, the lack of empathy towards the most vulnerable in the society, and the threats of foreign aggression depicted so well in Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy reverberate in modern day America, like Armenia, like never before. The world where power is in the hands of autocrats and oligarchs, we question, where is the milk of human kindness? or as one of our keynotes voiced, is there Macbeth or Lady Macbeth in all of us? Thank you for your attention.